In 2009, a strange little game released on the PlayStation 3. It wasn't marketed. It wasn't expected to sell. Even the people who made it didn't think it would succeed. That game was Demon's Souls. The publisher thought it was too hard. Reviewers called it clunky, unfair, confusing. Even Sony, the company that funded it, refused to release it outside Japan. It was a failure. And yet, somehow, this failure would go on to define an entire era. It would inspire a new philosophy of game design and create a genre that millions now call Soulslike. Directed by a relatively unknown developer named Hidetaka Miyazaki, it was built from the ashes of a project everyone had already given up on. It was supposed to die quietly. Instead, it changed everything. It created a whole new kind of game, one built on patience, punishment, and discovery, the foundation of what we now know as the Soulsborne genre. In this video, I'll explore what made Demon's Souls so revolutionary, how its troubled development gave rise to a new genre, how its bold design direction changed the way games are made and played today, what it got right and what it got wrong along the way, and how it became one of the most influential video games of all time. Before Demon's Souls, FromSoftware wasn't famous. They made niche games, such as Kingsfield and Armored Core. They are respected, but never mainstream. They had a loyal following, but their work rarely reached beyond a small, dedicated audience. When Sony's Japan studio partnered with them to build a dark fantasy RPG for the PlayStation 3, it was meant to be their next big step forward. Instead, it fell apart. The prototype was slow, confusing, and directionless. Even inside the company, it was labeled a failure. That's when Hidetaka Miyazaki, a designer who joined FromSoftware in 2004, stepped in. Miyazaki was born in Shizuoka, Japan, and studied social sciences at Keio University before working a corporate job he didn't love. One day, he played Ico, a cult classic game praised for its atmosphere, emotional depth, and artistic restraint. At 29, he left that career to join FromSoftware with no experience, starting as a junior designer on Armored Core. Not long after, he heard about a failing fantasy project no one wanted, Demon's Souls. He took over a project everyone else had written off. Because expectations were already gone, he had freedom. He rebuilt the game around challenge and consequence. He didn't want difficulty for its own sake. He wanted players to feel the joy of overcoming it. Death wasn't failure, it was built into the learning process. You would die, learn, and come back stronger. And that cycle of struggle and triumph became the heart of Demon's Souls. Every punishment carried purpose, and every victory felt earned. He believed the struggle itself was what made the experience meaningful, even if that meant going against what most studios would allow. At the time, that kind of design was seen as too punishing and risky, so during development, he quietly kept the game's real difficulty from Sony, afraid they'd force him to soften it. When Sony Japan tested the finished build, they didn't understand it. They thought it was too hard, too slow, too confusing. So they released it quietly in Japan and refused to bring it overseas. Western players importing the game began sharing stories of its difficulty and depth online. That small wave of curiosity would soon turn into a cult following. That wave eventually reached Atlas USA, a smaller publisher known for taking chances on niche Japanese games. They saw the growing demand and decided to localize Demon's Souls for North America in 2009. To everyone's surprise, it became a sleeper hit. Reviews praised its tension, atmosphere, and unforgiving design. What began as a failed experiment in Japan had become one of the most talked about games of the year. Its unexpected success changed everything. FromSoftware went from a niche developer to a name suddenly watched by the rest of the industry. The The same ideas that were once dismissed, its challenge, its mystery, its demand for player attention, became the blueprint for a new kind of game. 2 years later, Miyazaki and his team refined those ideas into Dark Souls, a spiritual successor that turned a cult following into a worldwide phenomenon. What began as a failed experiment had quietly started a revolution in game design, one that still shapes how modern games are made today. Before we continue, please consider to like and subscribe. I upload high-quality video game analysis every week, exploring how great games are built and the deeper meanings behind them. If you believe that video games are more than just entertainment, that game is art, then this channel is for you. Now, let's continue. Okay, now let's talk about the game itself. How does Demon's Souls actually hold up after all these years? Especially now, with Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring setting such a high bar. Does it still feel good to play? Or does it show its age after all this time? For this part, I'll be using the remake as the comparison, mainly because it's the most accessible version right now, and honestly, the best way to experience the game today. It keeps all the original mechanics intact, so it's still the same Demon's Souls, just rebuilt with modern visuals and controls. And after replaying it recently, I think there are certain parts that still hold up incredibly well, even compared to newer games. And there are other parts that, honestly, feel wrong, outdated, or just plain frustrating, especially if you come from newer games such as Bloodborne or Elden Ring. Let's start with what it got right first. The combat still feels great even today. The fundamentals, such as stamina management, timing, spacing, and how mistakes are punished, are all here, exactly like in the newer Souls games. Sure, it's a bit slower compared to newer ones, but it's still very satisfying. Then there's the atmosphere, and this is where Demon's Souls really stands out. It has 5 different worlds, each with its own tone and identity. You travel between them through the Nexus, and each one feels like its own story. Balataria, for example, feels grand and tragic, like a fallen kingdom. The Shrine of Storms is open, windy, and unpredictable, with flying mantas circling high above. And then there's the Tower of Latria, one of the most unsettling areas in the series. I'll admit, the first time I played it, I hated it. It was confusing, dark, and filled with those mind flayers that always seemed to know where you were. But over time, I grew to love it. There's a kind of haunting beauty to that place. The dim corridors, the echoes of prisoners crying out in the distance, and the constant tension of never feeling safe. It's one of the most atmospheric locations FromSoftware has ever created. Then let's talk about the visuals, specifically for the remake version. The visuals in this game are stunning. Every location and object is built with an incredible level of detail. You can see the texture of metal, the reflection on water, and fire flickering in the dark. The weather system itself feels like a technical showcase. Rain, fog, and sunlight all rendered in a way that makes the world feel alive. Each one gives the game a completely different mood. It's the combination of great art direction and technical craftsmanship that makes this game look so good. The world feels alive, detailed, and believable in a way most games still struggle to match. Even today, I'd still call it the best-looking Souls game ever made. The haptic feedback on the DualSense adds a whole new layer to the experience. You can feel the weight of every swing, the impact when your weapon connects, and even the pulse of energy when you cast a spell. It doesn't just look amazing, it feels amazing. It's subtle, but it makes combat more tactile. Like the game's world isn't just something you see, but something you physically interact with. The sound design complements it perfectly. You hear the wind shift, metal crack, and the sharp whistle of an arrow flying past your head. Okay, Now let's talk about what this game got wrong. And honestly, there are many of them. It's clear that FromSoftware was experimenting with a lot of ideas at the time. Some of them worked, and others really didn't. The weakest part of the game, by far, is the boss design. Most of them are surprisingly easy, slow, predictable, and over before they even begin. Also, almost every fight has just one phase, and once you figure out the pattern, that's it. Even the ones that look intimidating, like the Tower Knight, fall apart once you know the trick to beat him. The only real challenge might be Flame Lurker, but even that one goes down fast once you learn how to bait him. After playing newer Souls games with complex, multi-phase fights like Sister Fried, Melania, or the Orphan of Kos, these early bosses just feel undercooked. Then there are the gimmick bosses, and Demon Souls has many of them. You can tell FromSoftware was experimenting, trying to make each encounter unique, but most end up more awkward than exciting. They're creative in concept, sure, but not always fun to play. The Dragon God is probably the most infamous example of this bad gimmick boss. It was heavily featured in trailers, shown as this massive, cinematic monster, meant to be the ultimate challenge for the player. But once the fight begins, there isn't really a fight at all. You just hide behind rubble, wait for openings, and pull 2 switches to bring it down. Stealth just doesn't work in a Souls game, especially in a boss like this. It completely kills the tension. After the pretty awesome Flame Lurker boss fight, I expected the final boss of this world to be something grand, but instead, it's just disappointing. The Fool's Idol is another bad gimmick boss. I remember having to kill her several times before I even realized what was going on. Turns out, you're supposed to kill the puppet master controlling her from outside the arena. Otherwise, she just keeps reviving, over and over. The game never hints at this properly, so it feels less like a clever secret and more like unnecessary frustration. Not every gimmick fight in Demon Souls is bad, though. Some of them actually pull it off, like Storm King. After spending the entire level being hunted by flying mantas, this fight finally gives you a chance to fight back. You pick up the Storm Ruler and send massive wind slashes through the sky, cutting down the same creatures that tormented you the whole way here. It's simple, but deeply satisfying. And honestly, it feels incredible. But what's worse than the bosses themselves is the boss run. Easily one of the most frustrating parts of Demon Souls. There are no mid-level checkpoints like in Dark Souls. The next Archstone only appears after you beat the boss. When you die, you're sent all the way back to the start, and some areas have no shortcuts at all to the boss. The most infamous example of this is the Old Hero. Every time you die, you have to go through the entire level again, fighting bone soldiers, dodging those annoying reapers, being shot at by the flying mantas, and hoping you don't fall off the edge. It's exhausting. The boss run itself is harder than the boss. I died more on the way there than during the fight. Later Souls games fixed this with smart shortcuts that respect your time, keeping the tension without the grind. Finally, there's the health reduction after death. Every time you die in body form, you respawn in soul form with only half your maximum health. You can use the Cling Ring to raise it slightly, but even then, you're still stuck with about 3/4 at best, and you're wasting one of your precious ring slots just to do it. It definitely makes the game harder, but at some point, it just feels like too much. I'm glad they removed this system from later Souls games. It's an interesting idea to tie death directly to your strength, but in practice, it just feels unnecessary. And when you get to New Game Plus, it becomes ridiculous. Everything one-shots you, and it stops being challenging. It's just unfair. So yeah, Demon Souls has a lot of brilliant ideas, but not all of them work. Some feel experimental, others just feel outdated. But even with all its flaws, it laid the foundation for everything that came after. It began as a project everyone had already written off. The kind of game that should have been forgotten. Because no one expected it to work, Miyazaki had room to take risks. Demon Souls became the reference point for a new kind of game design. Its core systems, risk, consequence, and limited guidance, became the base future games built on. The newer games also keep innovating from those ideas. Dark Souls refined that structure into a connected world that rewarded exploration. Bloodborne changed the rhythm, making combat faster and more aggressive. Elden Ring took the same core and expanded it into a full open world. In the end, Demon Souls wasn't a success in the traditional sense. It didn't sell millions or win major awards. But its impact reshaped how developers think about difficulty and design. It created a standard that still guides how games teach, test, and reward players. That's its legacy. A failed experiment that became the model for a generation of games. What started as a discarded project became one of the most influential games ever made. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I upload high-quality game analysis every week, breaking down how games are designed, why they work, and what makes them special. This channel is about understanding games beyond the surface, the systems, the storytelling, the craft, and the people behind them. Tell me what you think of Demon Souls and what you'd like to see next. I read every comment, and I always enjoy seeing different perspectives from people who care about games the same way I do. Your feedback helps shape what I make next, and it's always great to hear what you noticed or learned from these videos. Thank you.